Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Secure Connections, I would like to thank Secretary Manica Intik for joining us today. It actually took us 2 years to complete this report, and our partnership and discussions with the DICT definitely informed our writing and analysis. We are committed moving forward to continue engaging with the government, the private sector, especially the CERTs and the ICT community in pursuing initiatives to improve cybersecurity. If I may share my slide, please. Thank you. So first slide, please. Many believe that the pandemic accelerated digital transformation, but before 2020, rapid digitalization was already making breakthroughs in developed countries. The fourth industrial revolution has brought us AI, machine learning, robotics, blockchain, 5G, all anchored on digital technologies and being super connected, forcing people to go digital and changing the way we live, we learn, work, and play. However, every technology-enabled advancement throughout history carries with it unique and new risks. Long before the computer was invented, theft, fraud, and violation to one's privacy were already a crime. When the computer and the internet entered the picture, doing these offenses just became faster, more efficient to carry out, and the damage became wider, more complicated, and costlier for the victim. The benefit of accelerated digitalization is now intertwined with enhanced or renewed cyber threats. Malicious actors are always lurking and waiting to strike given the right opportunity and exploit our weakest and most vulnerable points. The first example would be the I Love You virus, the first truly global computer virus created by a Filipino at that in the year 2000. I Love You was believed to have infected tens of millions of computers, inflicting damages amounting to 10 billion US dollars. What made this virus so effective was that it exploited a very basic human vulnerability, the need to receive affection. So if you're familiar with the virus and you were one of the victims of the I Love You virus, no judgment. It is very, very effective. The second example is the COVID-19 pandemic that we're facing today. While the world is battling a real world virus, bad actors worked doubly hard to exploit a crisis, a public health crisis. In the first few months of 2020, at the height of the pandemic, there were thousands upon thousands of malwares, malicious URLs, spam messages, and phishing attempts, all related to COVID-19. Ransomware groups increased and targeted healthcare institutions, resulting in the paralysis of critical services. And online fraud was really thriving, with fictitious websites asking for donation for COVID-19 relief. Cyber attacks are not limited to individuals and organizations. The disruption of critical infrastructure is now becoming a weapon of cyber warfare. Cyber threat actors, some of whom are state-sponsored, they're very established, very well-funded, can wreak havoc on vital facilities such as power grids and telecommunications networks. The objective is to do harm to entire populations as an offensive or defensive against a rival state. Next slide, please. We now live in a world defined by the internet, whether we like it or not. But the global internet is fast eroding, and the geographical borders that were once blurred by the internet are now re-emerging. The splintering of the internet reflects how different countries view cyberspace and hence respond to cybersecurity issues differently. The first approach is the open and distributed internet led by the United States and promoted by countries like Australia and other liberal democracies. Now, this model is anchored on the principles of consensus building, the freedom of information flow, and the promotion of individual rights. Western concepts of privacy, personal security, and confidentiality are translated into electronic means. And for this type of model, the development of standards such as the IP is also based on open governance. The next model is the state-controlled, centrally managed internet promoted by the likes of China, Russia, and other like-minded states. The development of standards in this model rely on centralized top-down approach. The state preserves the desired social order online through controls such as user traceability, censorship, and legal interception. Now, there is also a phenomenon called fragmentation, where the states become increasingly assertive with imposing rules, policy, regulation, and standards on access, the way people access the internet, what content they access on the internet, and the technologies that they use for their own national internet network. Filtering, blocking, and the localization of data are just a few examples of how governments, whether liberal, authoritarian, or somewhere in between, contribute to the fragmentation of the internet. Now, the Philippines' cybersecurity posture depends on the kind of governance it wants to pursue as a nation. It can learn and adopt different features from various countries, whichever reflect or share its own principles and values. Next slide, please. So a comprehensive, robust national framework aligned with global best practices is an essential tool in securing cyberspace. Now, there are various frameworks that can be used for crafting a national cybersecurity policy and strategy. For national policies, there is the Budapest Convention of 2001. By far, it's the only international regional framework pertaining to cybersecurity with the status of a treaty obligation among states that signed it. The APEC framework for securing the digital economy that was released in 2019 identifies general strategies, but this one is focused on helping facilitate cross-border trade, investment, and economic growth. In the EU, they have the Cybersecurity Act of 2019, which mandates the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, or ENISA, to create a cybersecurity certification framework for products and services that are being exchanged within the Union. For organizations, we have frameworks like the US NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and this one is centered around a set of core functions that will help an organization achieve a robust cybersecurity posture. There are also frameworks that focus on specific areas, such as NATO's Manual on International Law applicable for cyber warfare, and of course, the US Clean Network Initiative, which seeks to promote an internationally accepted, technologically neutral standard of digital trust. Now, a direct result of the US Clean Network Initiative is that it excludes components produced by Chinese government affiliates in 5G networks. Next slide, please. So a cybersecurity framework essentially answers the fundamental questions. What constitutes cybersecurity? Who is responsible for it, and what protections will be put in place? Now, looking at the cybersecurity frameworks of select countries, the report found 6 of the most common threads, such as economic growth and prosperity, which is becoming more and more a top objective of why we need to protect cybersecurity. Cybersecurity policies can pertain to laws or policies that specifically address cybersecurity and or cybercrime, and it essentially establishes acceptable norms of behavior in cyberspace, which generally, of course, for many nations is about the peaceful use of cybersecurity, or cyberspace rather. Cybersecurity culture is another one. This entails raising awareness for organizations, for the government, for the public, and the need to have a highly skilled cybersecurity workforce. The Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT, which is essentially a group of experts who respond to cyber incidents, is also a common thread among the cybersecurity frameworks we see in many nations. Now, throughout the years, the role of the CERTs have evolved to also include monitoring and reporting of incidents, malware analytics, cybersecurity awareness and training, among others. And there, of course, there's also the cybercrime response. And finally, the need to protect national security by protecting critical infrastructure, which have been increasingly dependent on ICT systems. Next slide, please. So the table here shows the common elements found in national cybersecurity frameworks. And as you can see, critical infrastructure and strong cybersecurity defense systems are the most common elements among select countries, including the Philippines. Next slide, please. The rapid pace of digitalization and the growth of the whole digital ecosystem means that there is now a larger threat landscape and significant increase in cybersecurity risks. However, in the Philippines, cybersecurity is not seen as that critical yet. Because the country is still at the initial stage of digital transformation, of course, it was accelerated by the pandemic, there seems to be a misconception that we are not a target of malicious actors and that the cyber risks are pretty low. This kind of mindset, however, affects the decisions that the country, that the government and organizations make about investing in cybersecurity. It actually makes the country all the more vulnerable and is now a better target if you think about it, which could, of course, result in economic losses, damages. So we have to be careful about correcting this mindset. The country is at the stage of developing the institutional arrangement for cybersecurity. So while this might be seen as too late by some, it can actually be a good opportunity because now we're seeing and learning from other countries. Under RA 10844, the DICT has the mandate to promote cybersecurity through policy and standards, but of course, challenges remain. It is very important that cybersecurity initiatives be considered a top priority, not only by the DICT, but also by the management, the leadership of various government agencies, especially those that operate critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. What is critical infrastructure? It's essentially the assets, systems, and networks, whether physical or virtual, that are considered so vital to the nation that their destruction or disruption would have a debilitating impact on things we hold dearly, like national security, health, safety, or the economic well-being of citizens, or the combination of these things. Now, next slide, please. In the critical infrastructure ecosystem, there are components such as the computers, ICT networks, and digital assets that are used for the operation and maintenance of critical infrastructure. These make up what's called the Critical Information Infrastructure, or CII. Cybersecurity is primarily focused on protecting CII. Now, to talk about the criteria for defining critical infrastructure and to give you some, discuss the examples of what can be considered critical infrastructure and the institutions that are responsible for them, as well as the key recommendations, basically, of the report on how to improve the Philippine cybersecurity posture, I'd like to call on my colleague, Dr. William Yu.